Okay, today I'm sitting with Ed, who is the co-founder and CEO of Littledata. He's been a client of Content Army for some months now, and we're just going to chat a little bit about his experience working with us, what he was doing before we started to work together, and then his advice for other people who want to get involved in this content space. So first of all, Ed, if we just go back to the beginning of our engagements, because obviously you were creating content before we initially spoke. Tell me where you were at and also why you started to work with us and where you felt it could be improved.
Yeah, so I made a sort of decision around 18 months ago to really double down on LinkedIn content, just looking at who we're trying to sell to and what platforms had relevance to that buyer. I still think for B2B that's the obvious choice, and so I got to the stage where we were posting regular, text posts probably like 3 or 4 times a week. And it was definitely starting to have an impact. I could see the trajectory of where they could get to. But I think what we realized is that when you actually start to up both the quantity and the quality in terms of pushing up to 5 or even sometimes 6 posts a week, and quality as in regularly good quality video content, that's not something we can do internally. We need both the resources to actually produce the content, but actually more importantly we need a bit of strategy and iteration on what content is really resonating with the audience. And so I think that's what we wanted to take to the next level, is like we could already see where LinkedIn content could go if we could scale it up. But what we were lacking is both the knowledge of the strategy of actually let's call it the tactics of how to post better, but also the actual process of how to produce that content.
Yeah, well, you did obviously, or you are making our life a lot easier, because I always say to people, you get out of this what you put in, and you definitely put a lot of effort into it. Whereas a lot of people do think they can just make a post and then disappear. You really need to think about every element of it, the networking, the hook, the
Yeah.
actual production process. So it takes two to tango on this. And I would love to know, like, what's been the most valuable thing for you in regards to the service and the strategy? Because I know you mentioned like executing on the video content was difficult before. Just walk me through where you feel the most value we've added has been.
Yeah, I think there's 2 areas actually. I do think the first thing is the knowledge of the target customer, the knowledge of our ideal customer, and what they're looking for. So I think that being with yourselves sort of deeply immersed in that D2C e-commerce world, just knowing what will resonate and not is hugely important. I have my own ideas, but it's so important to have someone you can bounce it off, validate, and actually provide some feedback on what else is working in the market. So that sort of currency with what is working. But I think the second thing is actually starting to just run a process, including, as you say, it's not just about record and forget and it's all done. It's the iterations of actually going back and improving each post and adding the text, positioning the image right, all of these little details, and being able to run that process repeatedly. Because I think what I've learned about this process is that it's not an overnight success. All the other people I see executing this well, explain this takes many years to build up. So I think being able to have a process that month in, month out means that we can deliver high quality content is hugely important.
And which area in particular do you think has improved the most? I know obviously I'm always pushing you a lot on the hooks, and when you do send across your content for review, I spend most of my time giving feedback there. Has it helped you think differently about how you're writing the content and creating those hooks?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do think I struggle as most perhaps tech technical founders do, in terms of putting myself out there enough. It feels very uncomfortable. I'm not a person that typically engages in social media a lot, so I think being pushed a bit to take perhaps exactly the same opinions and content I have, but position those in a bit more of a hooky way, a baiting way, perhaps sometimes. That is actually sometimes what makes a difference. Plus, I think trying to, as I say, build in using my unique voice, but building in some kind of best practices work for other people. So I think being able to advise on, like, this style of posts work for other people, this style of hooks work for other people, this sort of style of content has worked for other people, this tactic, whether it's I know a lot of this stuff is very transitory. I think that's why it's so important to work with an agency that is actually keeping current on this stuff, because what worked 2 months ago, for example, the classic, send, if you want this content, comment in the threads, that tactic might work then, but it may not work 2 months later. So I think having someone who's keeping current with what is getting engagement now helps us to keep iterating and keep being better.
Yeah, and I think for anybody listening, that is a very important point that Ed posted there, because I can never, or our team can never, replicate your authentic, unique knowledge, because you're a subject matter expert in that. And even though we do offer a done for you service, the reality is you get best results when it's done with you, because we need to find a way to harness and extract that knowledge from you. And that is difficult with a lot of people in the B2B space and founders, especially when they come from a technical background, because sometimes it doesn't come naturally to them. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
And practice makes perfect. Obviously, the more you do this, the more comfortable you get, and then the more traction you start to get, and then you believe in the process more and you start to see the results.
Yeah, and as you say, it's that partnership of unique content. That's the bit that I've spent a decade, becoming an expert in. But it's also partnering with that is, the delivery method and everything from actually the phrases I'm using to the how I stand to how I which text I put in capital letters. This is all the little bits that turn okay content into great content. And I think we all know that the only stuff that really catches the wave is the great content. There's no point churning out in any platform. And perhaps the interesting thing with LinkedIn is that it's perhaps that was true 2 years ago, is that the mediocre content still got cut through, and that's just not true anymore. Everyone else is investing in quality, and so you need to as well.
Yep, absolutely. And just talk to me a little bit about your results, Ed. Now, I'm not going to take exclusive credit here, because you've been posting for a long time before, and this is a compound effort that takes place over time and you see the results from. And I know a lot of people are thinking that they can start to create content and then it's just instantaneous, MQLs if you're in SaaS. You've spoken a lot in the past about partnerships, people approaching you at events. So I think it's really useful context for anyone who is wondering what type of results, how should I attribute this? Just tell me about some of those impacts that you've noticed both online and offline through creating content consistently.
Yeah, absolutely fair. So I don't think, I think, as you say, certainly initially, it's maybe starting to come through now, but really, 6 months down the line, I think initially the results are not just people hammering on your door saying, can we install your app, or can we buy your product? I think that the first thing is just, as actually good quote from Adam Robinson of retention is fame changes everything. And he doesn't mean fame in a kind of I want to be Taylor Swift kind of way. It just means that if people recognize your face and they recognize your content, it opens doors. People have more conversations with you. They're more likely to respond to emails. When you ask for stuff, they're more likely to help you out. When you comment on their post, they're more likely to reply. So I think just this sort of greater engagement with a lot of our online content is one thing, and then and not just my post specifically. As I said, I think anything else the company pushes, sort of I think of it as halo effect to the other content we produce. But I think you're right. Actually, at events and so on, starting to be people actually coming up and saying, I love what you're putting out. It's so think of 3 of the quotes I can think of recent events I've gone to. One person said it really helped them explain to their boss what Littledata did. Like they'd had a really hard time explaining. They got it, but they needed sort of video content they could share with their boss. I think the second quote was just by a young entrepreneur who's just really inspired by what it did and was actually just following the company, just to sort of cheer us on from the sidelines. And those sort of people are so important over the long term to for recommendations and referrals. And thirdly, just someone coming up and just saying, look, they really saw it as they looked at Littledata as experts. Like they're really following us for all the useful content they're putting out, and I think that makes us then way more likely, if they're not already a customer, to engage with us in the future.
I love that you've pointed out, those three factors. And I think
Yeah,
it boils down to authority and trust, and
yeah,
not just thinking of this as a marketing activity, which it is. We all want to generate sales and leads from it, of course. But I always say to people to reframe your mindset and think of this as a business activity that you just have to do to strengthen every area, whether it's your outbound, whether it's the trust in the brand, whether it's your on-site performance, whether it's people being more receptive to partnerships offline. Like, this
yeah,
helps with so many areas that people just don't consider when they initially start.
yeah. Yeah, it's a brand building exercise, and I guess the point is we live in a world in which personal brand is everything, and you, as a founder, you need to be comfortable with using your personal brand to promote the company brand. And I think for a long time, we were trying the really hard uphill battle of trying to just push stuff through the company brand, and no one cares. People don't care about your company brand. What they want to know is they want to hear from you as a founder what you're personally doing, what your company is personally doing. And if you everywhere you look, particularly in the D2C space, that's how great brands are being built. So I think we just have to learn that that's the world we live in. People want to hear from other people, and platforms like LinkedIn particularly have an incentive to promote that kind of content in a way they don't have if it's just corporate white paper kind of rubbish.
Yeah, absolutely. It's changed completely B2B selling in that regard. And I suppose you've summarized everything nicely, but what would your advice be to people who are on the fence, not necessarily who just want to go ahead with us, but just creating content and posting consistently in general? What would your advice be to these people?
I think it's the Nike slogan, just do it. So as you say, it's very hard sometimes. And I've honestly, I have personally talked about for 3 years, wanting to do more video content. And it's a discipline you have to get into. It feels like as a founder, it's going to be very hard to carve out the time. And I think that was my greatest concern when working on Content Army, was just like, am I going to have the time to engage with this and to do my share of the bargain? But I think once you start making that time and sacrifice other things, you realize, just as you say, how important that is, and actually how that does actually help with other aspects of your role. So yeah, I think break the duck and just start producing.
I agree with you completely. And obviously, we as a company sell that value proposition as time. But the reality is, we do save people time, but what you put into it, you get out. So if we do have a collaborative effort with the founder, like we do with yourself, that just helps a massive amount. Because as I said, our job is to harness that unique knowledge and subject matter expertise. And the only way we're able to truly get to the essence of that is the more time we spend with you. So yeah, I think it's critical that you pointed that out.
Yeah. It's a partnership, and you've got to make time for it. But I think what the partnership allows me to do is focus on the bit that I can uniquely do, which is to ideate
Exactly.
and write and record interesting content, and allow the team around me to actually make that into a great post.
Perfect. Well, Ed, appreciate you sharing your experience. I'll wrap things up, but thank you very much for your time.
No worries.